make it today. So an officer is going to read it. So he's going to do a triple. So he's taken 3 segments. So it'll last around 9-10 minutes, I believe. Is that the case?
Yes, I believe so. Joe will read it out.
Joe.
I make this statement on behalf of myself, Mr. and Dr. Sodhi, and we represent hundreds of people, including their children, who can't be here but will be detrimentally impacted should this appropriation go ahead to allow what is a build development. Talk to anyone on social media, on the street, in the park, in the meadow, they will all say it's a done deal. And yes, it is as far as the ruling incumbent councillors are concerned. That is evidenced in their committees in pursuit, and it's no secret this is the site they want, and this is the site they shall have. So, the officer seems to me to be saying that apart from the loss of open space, no other argument is valid because they have planning permission. By the way, that's outline planning permission. So, as a cemetery is a topology of open space, there won't be any loss. End of. Let us be absolutely clear on this. Let's talk about the reality. This is for a build development of a new, from scratch, forever expanding operational cemetery. Entrance gates running into the large car park area, lanes off to accommodate the hearse, ancillary buildings to accommodate the digging, maintenance, equipment and toilets. And once it's begun, other buildings associated with the burials will no doubt be granted permission. Continuation of digging up graves with or without headstones up or down. No time to elaborate more, but you will have the reality of a cemetery in your focus tonight. Let's be absolutely clear of what this land is now here today. A unique part of Arrow Valley Park South, part of the park given over in trust by Redditch Newtown Development Corporation for pleasure. It is an established, well-loved and used semi-natural area close to our urban homes. This has been acknowledged by a council solicitor in a response to my complaint. As committed members of Overview and Scrutiny, you will have outsourced that the high value and use of this piece of parkland for enjoyment of recreational pursuits is proven and weighted heavily. From as high as the national government policies, including Public Health England and National Planning Policy Framework. Even the Inspector of State declared the council could not allocate Arrow Valley Park as land for the development of Plan 4 because of its great importance for recreational needs. Down to Worcestershire Green Infrastructure Framework to your own policies. You will be aware of the recent allocation of £85,000 from the National Government Levelling Up Parks Fund. This is an allocation based on the evidence that Arrow Valley Park is in one of the deprived parts of England for recreational spaces within walking distance of homes. The idea is to keep and make more, not take away. So please question why the officer is seemingly adamant that this build development is exactly the same thing as a park. On financial argument, it is the public's fault Bereavements was allowed to go ahead to spend £60,000 on a planning application before public and council consultations and now used as a reason to go ahead with appropriation regardless of argument because of it being cited as a waste of public funds if not granted. On their land hectareage argument, question the arguments and the maths given by the officer regarding taking this parkland away because there is an adjacent and wider parkland. It is not just a question of hectares, it is a question of accessibility and quality, how it best serves the public. Question the figure of area given for the maths against the figure on planning amended area. Why that takes in the surrounding public highway paths, woody areas, which is included for planning, but excluded from this appropriation with the same drawing. Question the figures for the adjoining and whole park and used in the maths calculation. For example, in the immediate vicinity, there is the vast GKN Works buildings and land and private residences, mill cottages, stables of no public access. We share the park with the wildlife and they are entitled to open grasslands, scrub and ponds which are off limits to humans and rightly so and cover much land in the immediate vicinity. Immediately below is wild goose playing fields, predominantly in use football fields and BMX skate park waiting for expansion. Also, hectareage of the whole park. For example, the 2.5-mile stretch of river runs within the park and the lakes, and we cannot, as yet, walk on water. These provable points, along with others I've no time to list, but you will find will seriously change the maths and turn in the public's favour the need of this piece of park for recreation needs. As committed members of O&S, you'll have access to public's representation summarised in this report for fairness. You will have found a detailed submission from a highly qualified town planning consultant which has seemingly been dismissed as irrelevant. There is no time to mention all, but for the record tonight, particularly pertinent point made by this qualified open space consultant, that the fact of the open space needs assessment has been proven as woefully out of date and inadequate for 2022, and thus renders the public open space quotes in this report as unsound. Make no mistake, this piece of park is wholly valuable in the provision for Matchborough Ward, and indeed, people come from, in particular, Winyates, Churchill, Woodrow, Greenlands, to make use, as well as visitors alike, due to its regional status. Other pertinent points made by the public also appears missing, including a record of a petition of over 400 legitimate signatures and some with comments. Also missing or dismissed much of my own Dr. and Mrs. Sodhi, while what other points in public submissions have been dismissed or ignored as well. This council, with its transient members of today, have a duty to make decisions now that will not prevent future generations from having the same opportunities. The planning statement of intent is relevant here. The intention of wider space allocation for each grave of including natural burial area, as well as the statutory inclusion of all faith domains and their rights of burial, which includes separation allowances and open for everyone, anyone in and outside Redditch. Also relevant, the GEO report. The declaration of the parkland in this site contains bands and deposits of impenetrable siltstone. Also groundwater issues in parts and environmental restraints. These facts will seriously detrimentally skew the numbers of graves per hectare of land as declared by bereavements for future years' worth of graves, which after all, graves are the point, and it's already a wildlife haven. What then? When this meadow is filled, the precedent is set for taking yet more parkland from the adjoining parkland. This piece of our precious park will just become the gateway to the ever-consuming need for burial land as the population grows with its diversity of people's needs and rights to burial. A park already insufficient for today's needs, especially highlighted by COVID. What choice will the future councillors have to justify the plus £1 million this council will have spent on the gateway until them to continue it? There are alternative sites that are not parkland available now, thereby not causing such major impacts on the people now and the future for their need of this park for pleasure. And just to finish, please, I believe this present council leadership will, to coin a phrase, will have to be going some to argue in law that an operational cemetery outweighs an existing open grassland meadow, scrub, wood and ponds in terms of wildlife, biodiversity and climate change, and be going some even more to argue in law an operational cemetery is a place of enjoyment, fun among the graves, and therefore will be no loss of this well-loved, valued, much-needed, easily accessed, high-quality, historic piece of park, heavily used for enjoyment for the benefit of our mental and physical well-being in recreation, as is our right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, for reading that out, and thank you very much for the authors of that statement, Mr. John Lovell and others who made that declaration. I think it's Dr. Sodhi and Mr. Ian Sodhi. So thank those for making that statement. The next speaker is Eileen Mahone, who's in the room. If you come to the speaker, and I think you've been briefed on what you can and can't do on your time limits. If you press the mode type button, then the light will come on, and then you've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. My name is Eileen McMahon. I would like to state my opposition to the council's proposed appropriation of the land at Ipsley Meadow for the purpose of a cemetery. I've just listened to the previous speech, and some of the things I will say will repeat those as well. Ipsley Meadow is part of the Yarra Valley Park, offers valuable open recreational space, and to quote the council's own website, is protected as a green space where the management of the park is taken very seriously to ensure it is stewarded and improved for future generations. The Yarra Valley Park as a whole is a well-loved, highly valued community asset, used daily throughout the seasons by the whole community and beyond. We are all aware of the growing need for fresh air and open recreational spaces in order to support good mental health and well-being, places for sport, walking, other activities, or just as an open space for social interaction. We need more spaces like Ipsley Meadow, not less. Furthermore, there needs to be good, safe access for pedestrians to enter Ipsley Meadow from Ipsley Church Lane. I am very disheartened that the public footpath number 621C, which runs parallel to the lane, has been blocked for many years, making pedestrians having to walk up the road with moving traffic on the steep and narrow lane. I am aware that the issue of the blocked footpath has been raised previously by Redditch Ramblers with the County Council, actually on a number of occasions. And when I was walking there recently, local people said it had been blocked for years and you had no choice but to walk up the road. I am a member of the Ramblers Association. I urge you please to protect and improve access to Ipsley Meadow for all of the reasons outlined. We need those open recreational spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that presentation. The next agenda item is agenda item number 5, which is a principal and only agenda item left on this evening's agenda. And it's a pre-scrutiny appropriation of land off Ipsley Church Lane for planning purposes. Before I call the officers, and it will be Michael and Guy, I think we'll do the double act presenting the report. I did read the report when it was online before we got the hard copy published, and I think officers will confirm. I sent an email over the weekend having read the report, particularly on page 18 of the 14 categories listed, 13 of which are dealt with already by planning, and we were left with the one item, which is loss of recreational space. I requested those 60 suitably redacted and suitably anonymised emails or letters to be circulated so we could scrutinise the item. Unfortunately, officers, which I think they're going to touch on tonight when they present, weren't able to do that for us in time for this evening's meeting. But I think we're going to get a sample of letters read out. I think I spoke up this morning. I think that's what's going to happen. But I did attempt for members of Scrutiny and Overview and Scrutiny to get access to those letters so we know what was said as opposed to just a number on there. But hopefully the presentation by both officers will expand on that and give us an insight into just that one item where it says the 60 lot of recreational space. So having said that, I shall pass over to Michael or Guy to start. Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So on page 15 of your additional papers pack, you'll find the report into the appropriation of land off Ipsley Church Lane for planning purposes. The first section, of course, is the recommendation to executive to do just that, to appropriate the land under section 122, subsection 2A of the Local Government Act 1972. The background to this, as has been mentioned already, is that there was a planning decision which was actually dated April this year for the change of use and an entrance subject to various conditions. And the permission was to create a modern style cemetery using open space and biodiversity in the best way possible to ensure wider ecology is enhanced. The land in question is designated as primarily open space and even remains so with this change of use permission. It's therefore appropriate to appropriate the land for planning purposes, and this is required in law under the previously mentioned section 122 of the Local Government Act. Section 3 of the report, which is actually on page 16, talks about the appropriation process. And I think it's just important to note here, there's been discussion already or comment made about planning matters and planning items. This report is purely about the appropriation process, which is a separate legal process to change the designation of the land from its current recreational use to one for planning purposes. So as you'll see later on, the discussion around items like open space as a legal term are not contained in this report because it's not something that's covered by appropriation. Hopefully I'll make that a little bit clearer as we go through, but I think it's important right from this outset. When we look at the appropriation process, it requires local adverts to be placed in 2 consecutive weeks. You'll notice through reading section 3 that we actually placed 3 adverts. The first one had an incorrect email address, so we felt it was appropriate to extend an additional week and indeed extend from the 16th of September to the 28th to allow people the ability to make representations. So following the process, if the council decide to appropriate the land, then it's released from its current use, which is imposed by section 164 of the Public Health Act and the Public Health Act 1875 and the Open Spaces Act 1906. The report also details the planning designations of open space and primarily open space in section 3, which were used during the change of use application, and hopefully those make sense as you read them in planning terms. So section 3.6, which is on page 18, details the objections in terms of categories. And as the chair has already mentioned, we had a conversation around section 1, which is the loss of recreational space, and the 60 objections that are classified under that. We weren't in a position, I'm afraid, to be able to circulate all 60 individual, 59 emails and 1 letter, purely from the point of view of the resource of having everything redacted. However, I have got a sample here, which I think I'll read now, which will then make sense as we move down through the report. So obviously I can't give the details of who they're from, but the first one says, I have lived opposite this park area for 51 years and always thought the land was gifted to the people of Redditch from the Development Corporation for use for recreation. It should be kept for that purpose. It's a very popular area for all ages at all times of the year. Surely all burial facilities should be kept in one area. I strongly feel the people of Redditch will eventually lose this park area to build a crematorium there. A second one reads, I wish to strongly object to the council's appropriation of Ipsley Meadow in order for it to become a cemetery. The meadow is part of Arrow Valley Park and was gifted to the people of Redditch as an amenity. This is the only open space within a distance I can walk to, and despite arguments to the contrary, this area is used and enjoyed by many other people. If this amenity is lost, I will no longer have somewhere to go to enjoy the freedom of open space and fresh air, and it will be a dreadful loss. You should not imagine that anyone would want to sit or walk amongst graves, and the dead can take no pleasure from it. Please consider my view and that of many others wanting this area to be preserved for the living and future generations, which has this most contentious and unwanted development in Redditch's history. And a third, please can I register my objection to the proposed change of use for the field at Ipsley Meadows. I'm a keen runner and regular dog walker. These fields form part of a network of green space that makes Redditch such a delight to live in. If we allow our communal spaces to be reallocated to cemeteries or other developments, we will eventually lose our green corridor as each generation reallocates a little more to what they seem like worthy causes. It seems the land will never be returned to a communal space, and eventually there will be a need for further cemetery expansion. The council should be gently guiding people towards other options that do not require an ever-increasing supply of our limited green spaces. So in the table that's on page 18, there's a paragraph that references that items 2 to 14 are not considered in this appropriation report. Those are because they all are referenced in the planning application, and in legal terms are planning matters, not appropriation matters. It's a subtle difference, but things like loss of open space or groundwater conditions, whether there were highway concerns, maybe increased traffic or potentially sort of traffic jams and traffic logs in the area, those are all planning items and can't be considered as part of the appropriation process. So that leaves us the only section at the top, section 1, and item 4 in the report talks about the loss of recreational space. And just in those 3 objections, you can see the concerns around not being able to walk in the area, dog walking and various other activities, sledging, paragliding, picnics, and a number of people mentioned mental health concerns, that they've used it extensively over the course of COVID in particular, but I'm sure before that as well. So the site being considered in section 4 talks about some specific sizes. So the actual site in question that's detailed in Appendix 1 to the report is actually 4.6 hectares. And within a kilometre, not including things like roadways and pathways, but purely open green space, within a kilometre of the centre of the site, there's an access to another 55 hectares. So in very simple terms, if you round it, including the 4.6, so 60 hectares, it's about 8% of the land in that one area that we're considering for executive to appropriate. In the wider Yarra Valley Park, there's 364 hectares. So of course, the calculation there is 4.6 hectares in that wider 364. It's just over 1% of the land, leaving 98.7% of that land available. There are no direct financial implications. I know there was mentioned earlier the £60,000. That's referenced in the report purely to note that, of course, if appropriation isn't considered appropriate, then the money that we've already spent is effectively lost. But there are no direct implications within this report. And then on to section 7, which is on page 20. I think it's important just to reference to this committee in particular the climate change implications, and also there's the leisure strategy, which has been produced recently and agreed recently at council. And this cemetery has always been considered and has always been brought forward as something very different to your more traditional item. And section 7.3 on page 20 details the 3, albeit they're numbered 1, 3 and 5, recommendations that are in the Parks and Open Spaces strategy agreed by the council, that we would expect that this would still fall under and still have a requirement to meet, and that being an understanding of biodiversity within the area, providing a net gain, which was always the point that we brought forward right from the beginning, and considering further carbon capture and natural capital gains in terms of what could be done with the cemetery and different burial methods. So the commitment's already been made via planning to do that, but of course the appropriation process is about changing the designation of the land from recreational use to being available for planning purposes. And of course we know that the change of use already exists, so we would expect that to then become a cemetery. And that concludes my overview of the report. I don't know if you wish to. No? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that. If I could, there may not be a chance for you to answer this because it's off the cuff. I'm just going to make reference to 1 or 2 comments made by the public speakers. You may or may not be able to answer it. Eileen, who spoke earlier on, talked about a public roadway that's been stopped off. I mean, it's a county council highway matter. I don't know if you know about that, or if it does impede what would have been an access through that site, or it needs to be diverted, or you've got no knowledge of it. I'm just flying a kite on that one.
I don't know of the specific public right of access. I think that may be outside of the site that we're dealing with. There is one directly down the middle of the site in question, and we've always talked about retaining that. So if it's off the site that we're discussing in this report, then it's a county council matter.
You are confirming there's a public right of way through the site and that will remain there?
There is a public right of way. We are expecting to keep it, but to change it anyway, we would have to go through a legal process. So we've said right at the planning outset, there's no reason that you couldn't. It's a direct line from top to bottom. It's literally as straight as you can take, and it helps us with our phase development if we were able to do the cemetery there anyway.
In terms of the public right of way, if it's blocked, then we can get the parks team to look at that.
Well, that won't be helpful because for what was said by the public speaker, they've been trying to get county to respond, and it's been closed for some time. I'm just quoting what was all you heard. I heard it first time as you heard it. But any intervention, whether it's adjacent or not to this site, is obviously something that shouldn't be stopped up if it shouldn't be stopped up. I'm sure that the speaker may well pass that to you at the end, perhaps to the officer. Thank you very much. The other point, to do justice, if I could have your indulgence, to the contributions made. I won't go through everything that they've said, but that we were asked specifically when the person read the statement out, or Joe read the statement on behalf of the person, about the officers being adamant that the built development is exactly the same. Before the portfolio holder wants a word, but Councillor Fleming, who's a portfolio holder, has indicated.
Sorry, Chair. I think someone's microphone went off, so I was just messaging to say that I couldn't actually hear the proceedings. I don't know if you want me to contribute now or whether you want me to come back. I'll leave that up to you.
I normally tend to call you in at the end.
That's brilliant. That's fine. I just
not you specifically, but the portfolio holder. That's how we normally run it, unless there's a specific question from members. But normally you sit and listen, and you're there to offer advice if asked, and then I'll give you opportunity for any comment that you may want at the end.
No, thank you. It's just that people weren't talking with their members with their microphone on. So if we can just keep that on, I can hear. Then thank you.
I don't. So you didn't miss very much. Have you missed any of it or all of it?
Just the last minute. I think you mentioned you were questioning Guy, and I've probably listed the last minute or two. So unless there's anything important that needs repeating, but the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, you heard Michael's reply. There's a public right of way going through, and then Guy responded to the closed off footway that he said he'll ask Borough Council officers to try and find out why it's been stopped off apparently for so long, and I've requested the speaker who raised it to give the relevant documentation to the officer so they can pursue. The guy kindly offered to help something which is really a county council matter, but probably pertinent to the site anyway. So I think that's all you missed, I think. Right. So I think now if I can look to members to be mindful of what's already been considered by planning. So I think you're restricted maybe just to the recreational space and the various paragraphs that are in the report. Councillor Khan was the first hand I saw. Oh.
Thank you, Chair. Like many people in Redditch, I have serious concerns about the lack of burial space remaining at Borsley Lane Cemetery, but I have further issues regarding the proposed use of land off Ipsley Church Lane as a cemetery. It is clearly not welcome, and I have concerns about the suitability of the ground, as it is obvious that this land has a very high water table. This will make winter burial more difficult than present, and as such, this council has failed to identify appropriate land, but has managed to unfairly prioritise this site over all others. I'm mindful that time is not on our side, and that our speedy resolution is needed. Sadly, I, like many others, believe that this council has simply chosen the wrong option and not the best option in the interests of its residents. It has failed to listen to local voices, which have given many objections to a well-used recreational ground. The Ipsley Meadows cannot be all things to all people as it is being proposed, i.e., it cannot be both a respectful and sombre place to reflect on the lives of loved ones and remember them in peace and quiet on one hand, and on the other hand, a fun, recreational ground with laughter, joviality, sports, and dogs running around. The two are simply incompatible. The suitability of the cemetery site on the suitability of cemetery sites on the multitude of locations in Redditch and the surrounding areas previously identified have not been forwarded for consideration by this committee or in consultation with the residents of Redditch. There are other realistic and better options available if we work efficiently and with openness to achieve what is best for our residents. A favoured option would be to expand the current site where possible. This would see little to no objection and make vast savings as the facilities are already in situ. So for the reasons mentioned above, I suggest that this executive reviews other locations in a timely and efficient manner to help resolve this crisis that looms over us. I would just like to add a little comment. I note that the report does not contain any of the 60 letters of objection to the appropriation of land. We've had a sampling of 3 letters. I'm very grateful to the Democratic Services team for their efforts to source the letters. As a result, some of the emails have been read out this evening, which has been very helpful. However, we haven't been able to see the correspondence, and not every letter has been read out. This means we are unable to properly scrutinise the details of people's concerns about a very important decision, which will affect everyone in the borough for years to come. Chair, through you, if I may, I will now go on to several questions that I have prepared.
And one at a time, perhaps, better than all at the same time. Yeah, one at a time, and then perhaps a response. Okay, yeah.
Thank you. So the first question I've got is, I note that paragraph 2.5 says that the council can only appropriate the land if it is no longer required for the purpose for which it is currently held. Can you tell us what assessments have been made out to ascertain that the level of public need for Ipsley Meadows for recreation?
So in terms of appropriation, we have to advertise, and then we take the objections or any supporting comments in that respect. In terms of the legalities of appropriation, my understanding is we don't actually need to do anything other than consider those objections, which is what we're asking the Executive Committee to do next week.
Thank you. My second question is paragraph 2.7 sets out the definition of open space as any land laid out as a public garden or used for the purpose of recreation, or land which is disused burial ground. This seems to suggest that an in-use burial ground would not be defined as open space. Can we have some clarification on that, please?
Mike Rowan, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, members. I got cut out on the signal there. What was the question being asked of me?
I'll get the speaker to repeat the question. It's to do with 2.7. It quotes paragraph 2.7 found on page 16 of our report. So if we just go a little bit more than the 2.7, Councillor Khan.
So paragraph 2.7 seems to suggest that an in-use burial ground would not be defined as open space. Can we have some clarification on that, please?
So from my knowledge of it and from reading the reports, it's clearly clarified as open space under the Act, under the Open Spaces Act that was quoted by Michael Birkinshaw. So, and not being the author of the report, I'm struggling with the wording there myself, but it is clearly in law classified as open land at the moment, and that was the proposal put before the planning committee who decided on the change of use for the permission of the cemetery. I don't know if Michael Birkinshaw or Guy has anything to add to that.
Thank you, Chair. The only bit I would add to that is that there are, I'll say, two classifications, albeit for the same thing. So the typology of a cemetery in planning terms is open space. There is this specific piece of legislation around disused burial grounds as being classified as a, is it right to say better open space? I'm not sure that's the best language, but there are two different types that cemeteries quantify as open space, and an existing in-use cemetery still does, hence the planning decision as being compatible with open space.
I'm sorry, I would disagree with that. I've looked at the definition of open space, and it clearly states that land laid out as public garden or used for the purposes of public recreation, or land which is a disused burial ground. This clearly is not going to be a disused burial space, so cannot remain primarily open space as alluded to. Also, if you look at the notice outside the cemetery of Borsley Abbey, which I've visited today, it clearly reads, no children under the age of 14 unless accompanied, gates are closed at 5 p.m, no dogs and no cycling. That is what I would expect from a cemetery, not an open space, as you can clearly see.
Any comment to that, or your next question? There's no comment to that.
Can that be noted, please, that there is a difference in opinion of open space, and I have found a definition of it. Okay, my next question says, can you explain paragraph 3.2, the land would be released from any trust for the enjoyment of the public. What does this actually mean in practice then, please? How does this fit in with the land still being designated as open space in paragraph 2.7?
Michael.
So that is specific wording from the section 122, subsection A of the Local Government Act 1972, and it designates that the trust is an implied one from the Public Health Act. So open spaces historically weren't protected, so recreational space wasn't protected, and the Act, which is quite dated in its language, talks about trust. There isn't a specific trust like we would perhaps talk about one nowadays where there was a legal arrangement for the recreational use. So I think it's just a little bit of a legacy of the text. However, the principle is that if appropriated, it is no longer available for recreational use in law, and it can be used for planning purposes.
Just a very simple one you may be able to help me out with is, can you tell me what due consideration has been given to the proposed appropriation?
The answer to that is none currently, because it hasn't gone to executive, who are people that will be considering the report and hopefully doing a similar process of considering all the objections and all the information in front of them. So in actual legal terms right now, there has been no consideration.
Thank you, sir. Paragraph 3.3, I'll look at next, which says that there would be no impact on the open space deficit for Matchborough Ward. It seems that if open space is being lost, this would be a deficit, clearly, when compared to to what's available now. So we would have a deficit. Can you expand on this point? And are there national benchmarks that have helped you form this view? And if so, what are those benchmarks?
So paragraph 3.3 and 3.4 are directly from the planning report from last year. And it was the planning team and planning colleagues that put that detail together. And it's back to, I'm afraid, the definition of open space and the fact that it has no impact on the current deficit in that area. Through a planning process, but also it was noted at the time that Arrow Valley Park didn't form part of that assessment of open space for the local wards either. So regardless of which way you cut it, whether it is or it isn't open space, any change doesn't make any difference to the current calculation.
That being said, we've already considered the definition of open space, and I have iterated that at this meeting. I'll take note of what you've said, but it doesn't really wash, I'm afraid. Paragraph 3.5, can you tell me what is meant by the site would continue to function as an area of public open space of public value? What public value would that be, and how would that differ from the Abbey Cemetery?
Sorry, which paragraph was that on? Abbey Cemetery is a good example in relation to accessibility for starters. I'm afraid the signs on the outside are somewhat outdated, as although the vehicle access is restricted from 5 p.m, it is actually an open space in terms of the gates being available and open 24 hours a day. We've made no sort of secret of our expectation of any new cemetery at Ipsley Meadow to do exactly the same. And in fact, there was quite a lengthy discussion about restricted access and fences and various other methods of enclosing the area. And although Abbey Cemetery is perhaps not the best example to draw, as it's got a huge metal fence around quite big parts of it, there's no requirement in law to close a cemetery and enclose it within a fence line. So from our point of view, the natural boundaries there, things like the public right of way, the fact that the site is open for phased development, so it doesn't need to be a development that runs right the way across all near 5 hectares in one fell swoop, is where we see the ability to still continue to use potentially 50+% of that site for quite a number of years to come. And it functions in a similar way where, as Abbey Stadium is sited right next to Abbey Cemetery, the sports days and recreational use of the land around us would be exactly the same as far as we could see it. So it draws us to the same principle, that it's available and open and can be used.
I think it's principally quite different to the site at the current Bordsley the site, but I've noted what you've said. So I'll go on to the next question, which is paragraph 3.6. Can you explain why the following items are not being considered in the appropriation? Item 2, which is less open space, and item 13, potential conflict between different users. Is that purely because of the planning, or are there any other issues as well with regards to paragraph 3.6, the table?
Those items, the same as the others, are not part of the legal process of appropriation, which purely looks at recreational loss of recreational space, rather than, as an example, the legal term open space, which I know we disagree on, but the legal term of open space, which is a planning matter, or as an example, groundwater levels would be another example of that, where in cemetery development terms there are legal requirements by the Environment Agency. The appropriation process is purely a legal process about taking the current recreational space, perhaps is a better phrase to use, and asking whether that is available to be appropriated for planning purposes, of course, which then we know we already have an existing permission we would look to enact if this was to go through. So they're not considered because the legal process of appropriation doesn't provide for them. I don't know if Mike Rowan wants to add anything to that from the legal perspective.
Mike Rowan, would you like to comment on that, please?
No, I don't think I've got anything really to add to there, unless misheard. I think Michael covered the main points.
Thank you very much. Councillor Khan?
I'll move on to paragraph 4.3, which says that across the Arrow Valley Country Park, there are circa 364 hectares. Can you tell me how that's broken down? Do you have a figure for how many hectares the lake and the islands cover, for example? It would be interesting to know how much of that land is currently being used for recreational purposes when the whole of Ipsley Meadow is currently used for those purposes.
So the figure was taken from the council's website. In answer to your direct question as to how much of that space is included in terms of the actual lake and the island itself, I don't know.
Can you help us with paragraph 7.1, please, which says that the appropriation of land would not have any impact on the council's strategic purposes. How was this conclusion reached, and to what extent have people's physical and mental health and well-being been considered in accessing green space in the appropriation process? Mental health is mentioned in that paragraph 4.1, so we know that this is a concern among at least some of the residents who have objected.
So the point made is that the appropriation process doesn't contravene that particular strategic purpose, because the evidence within the report shows that there are other places, certainly within a kilometre, that would be able to be used for a same or similar purpose. So the point is that by appropriating the land, we don't believe that that actually has a direct impact on the strategic purpose.
Thank you. So considering what we've gone through there, Chair, I would like to propose the following recommendation, if I may, and that is that Overview Scrutiny Committee notes that members have not been able to read the 60 letters of objection, meaning that the committee has insufficient information to enable proper scrutiny of this very important decision. The Overview Scrutiny Committee therefore requests that the executive defers the decision until all the letters have been provided to members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for consideration at the next available meeting.
Moving that, are you? I'll second that recommendation to the executive. The executive make the decisions for members of the public in the gallery that may not know. Overview and Scrutiny advise the executive take the decision on this particular matter. So that's moved and seconded. I'm known for my questioning, but I think you've gone through most paragraphs and you've knocked off some of the points that I was going to ask on those very detailed questions. So I thank you for your questions. I thank the officers for their replies. I have got a list. Councillor Pearman was the next one I saw.
I was just, thank you, Chair. I was just going to bring to the attention of people about the public footpath that's been closed off. Being as I live about 200 yards away from the proposed site, it's actually a local resident that has blocked off the public footpath at the top end. And one of the neighbours did complain to me, and I passed it on to the relevant councillor who already comes under. I don't know if it's been cleared. I don't think it has because I walked past the other day. It's actually a local resident that's closed off. Okay.
That's helpful. We'll go towards the information pack we'll give to Guy and his good officers to try and pursue the county council, who are the responsible authority. I'm afraid you can't intervene. So I'm sorry you're indicating, but I'm afraid you can't intervene. Was that it, Councillor Pearman, or was there more? That was it. The next one was Councillor Salman Akbar.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just start by thanking all the officers who have done all the hard work in creating the consultation, consulting the public, summarizing the responses and doing all the hard work. I've got a couple of questions. My first question is that, was the consultation only limited to the residents of Ipsley and Matchborough, or was it open to all the residents of Redditch? Thank you.
So that consultation was open to all residents because the adverts were placed into the Redditch standard and the legal process is that it's for anybody to be consulted on, not just local residents.
Thank you. And my second question is that in paragraph 3.6, it says 69 people objected, 68 by email, 1 by letter. The summary table, which is listed below with items 1 to 14, it does take into account all of those 69 responses.
Yes, it does.
Right, but we have to discount 2 to 14 because it's already been considered by planning.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can read that. My question was to make sure that we haven't missed any letter or email that is not summarized here in this table.
We've missed it in the sense that I asked for it when it came out, but we weren't able to see it. So we know the number, and through discussion, we were helpfully got a sample of 2 or 3 or 4 earlier this evening. But the point was I wanted the 60 redacted, anonymised, just the content to know what they were saying per se. And that's the recommendation which is prompted by Councillor Khan. We haven't really, in his opinion, and I support his opinion, had the chance to scrutinise the one element that we were able to, but hadn't been considered at planning previously.
So, are we having doubts at this summary table then? That's the question.
I absolutely agree, and no objection. There was 60, but we don't know what it was under that one heading, loss of recreational space.
Yes, but all of them have been summarized here, so I don't know what we are missing. Okay, I know we are missing the actual content of those emails or letters, but if they are summarized here and 60 of them refer to loss of recreational space, then 60 of them refer to loss of recreational space, and that's what we can discuss. The rest were relevant to items 2 to 14, which are outside of the scope of what we are discussing tonight. So I can't see the need to recommend to the executive to defer the decision until we read all of those 60 emails or letters. Why? I can't understand it.
Well,
I can explain further. Basically, we're not going to get that. These simply state what the categories of the letters are. It gives you no flavouring of the voice of opinion of the public. I think we would be doing the public a disservice if we didn't hear what they have to say before this committee. There is no summary there. It is merely categories that are listed, and you cannot get the breadth and depth of the public opinion, which is what we are here to do. We should be listening to members of the public and hearing their voices. We've had an example of 3 letters today. I would like to see written all 60 emails with the names and addresses redacted. I think that's only fair and gives this process some due openness and transparency, and allows those voices to be heard, Chair.
It's the content of the letters that we're missing, and it seemed to be doing our job. We're an Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We've got a category of 60 in that category, but we haven't actually seen the content. It might have been a one-liner. It may have been several pages. We don't know, and we haven't seen it. I'm not doubting, it's in that category, but it's the content and the flavour and the feeling, and seem to be doing what we're supposed to do as a scrutiny committee, which you've been on for many years, and we've done it before. We've asked for evidence, and we've asked for officers to show us and to demonstrate to us, and so we can do deep dives into it and to find out what was there. So that was the reasoning behind it.
Thank you. My follow-up question is, does anyone know what the population size of Redditch is, the adult population size? Roughly?
I would guess 70-odd thousand. 5.
80.
We got a reverse ducks auction. It's gone from 75 to 86. There's the constituency, which is different to the borough. People get confused with the constituency, which isn't the borough. So the top offer is 86. If you want to top that one.
Sorry, is that 8,600 or 86 million or 86,000? Okay, so thank you. So out of 86,000 or circa 86,000, which the consultation went out to, we've got potentially 60 responses, which are falling in the category of loss of recreational space. Now, I am all for scrutiny, but I think the number, if we proportionate it, it's not that significant that we need to ask the executive to delay the decision-making process until we can read all of those 60 emails or letters. I think we've got the gist of those letters in terms of the categorization which is presented to us in this table. And this, like Councillor Khan said, and that's the only thing I agree with him in his very long opening statement, that there is a lack of burial space in Redditch. And I appreciate that he understands it as well. And I think we all understand this. So we need to kind of scrutinize the process, but also not try to delay it through, various unproportional challenges or obstacles. So I think we need to, I would be voting against that recommendation that has been moved. Thank you, Chair.
I've got no more speakers. Oh, I have.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few questions, because obviously I was also on the planning for this, so I have a bit of background. One of the first questions is, how long do we actually have in the current cemetery in terms of burial space, approximately?
Within the region of 2 years, but it varies dependent on burial rates, of course.
One of the big arguments we get is that you could just expand the Abbey Cemetery. Obviously, it's next to an ancient scheduled monument. How feasible would it be to expand the current cemetery as an alternative to a brand new cemetery?
Well, as was offered as a potential option at planning, one of the biggest concerns with considering the scheduled ancient monument is county archaeology have made it very clear that they would expect to object to that from planning purposes. We would still have all the same groundwater and requirements to do all the same amount of work as has been done at Ipsley as for any other site in that respect. But one of the biggest concerns there is the disturbance of a scheduled ancient monument, and archaeology's concerns that the amount of time and the amount of cost potentially, and their view was it would run into millions to mitigate the potential risk of utilising that site. So from a perspective of value for money, it's considered to be a site that can't be used, albeit that technically it was offered in the planning report, as you may recall.
Thank you. I think this is sort of the difficulty, really. We've been discussing this in one guise or the other for over a decade, and we could quite easily be discussing it for another decade if we choose drift and delay today. Within the planning, as one of the people have already alluded to, we had several hundred comments actually on the planning portal, which is publicly available and members of this committee could have chosen to read before tonight. In terms of the 60 letters and whether you could just redact it on the basis of names and addresses, as someone who works in data protection, I would suggest there may be other special category data, which means that would not necessarily be a lawful or proportionate way to go forward. Therefore, the level of redaction, your very convoluted process, that I don't think is in the interest of trying to resolve this issue. And as I've said, this is an issue which has been outstanding for so many years. We have 2 years apparently left. It may be less, it may be slightly more. We do need to get on with this because people do, in my opinion, have a right to be buried in this town, and we do need to get this to a resolution so we have an operational cemetery in time to ensure that we do not have a full stop in the provision of a cemetery grounds in this town.
Councillor Elton.
Yeah, again, thank you to the officers for a lengthy report and answering all the questions, and to my colleague Councillor Khan. Well, I think no one else could have done a better job at scrutiny in this tonight. And again, I agree with Councillor Salman and Tom. The argument to get more information or the letters read out or emails read out, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference because we've got the categories, and the majority of the objections are loss of recreational space. And then obviously if you go to paragraph 4.2, it clearly states there's still another 55 hectares surrounding this 4.6 hectare that we're considering. So I don't think it's a significant amount of space anyway. So, and majority of the other objections, most of them are planning issues, which I sit on planning as well, and they've been scrutinised and gone through vigorously. So I also will be objecting to the recommendation of Councillor Khan.
Okay, thank you. So I think every member of the committee's spoken on the matter, which is good. I'll call on the portfolio holder if he wishes to make any comments before we deal with the recommendation that's been moved and seconded.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody, and thank you to members and to the members of the public that spoke as well. I think just a reminder again that it has been mentioned already, this is not a planning application, nor is this a planning meeting. And I think that perhaps it's very easy to talk about the planning, but of course there will be an opportunity, a future planning meeting to discuss many of these issues. This is simply a legal process, and that has been clearly set out both by Mike and through the paper, and I'm grateful, of course, to Mike for answering all of his questions. So I think that it is important that people have had their say at the previous planning meeting, and then, of course, in due course, if we were to appropriate this land, that will be another opportunity to talk about the nitty-gritty aspects. This is again purely a legal process that we have to undertake.
Thank you. I'll now go to the vote. Do members want to have it read out again, or are they okay with what's been moved and seconded? Can you indicate to me? Are you happy to vote on what you've been moved? So, all those in favour of the recommendation as moved by Councillor Khan and seconded by myself, could you please indicate? I count 2. Those against? 4. The resolution recommendation falls. So that's been dealt with. I'm in your hands now. Do you want to go with the run of speakers, or do you want to end the meeting now? I'm in your hands. Nothing else has been moved. You need to put your lights on.
Sorry, Chair. I think Councillor Baker, did you not move the recommendation as printed? Yeah. Okay then. So I can second that. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
Happy to remove the recommendation, Chair. As I've already outlined, I think that we've had too much drift and delay over this subject. We do need to move to resolution. We've had extensive discussions of alternatives without many of them being suitable in any way, particularly the Abbey Cemetery. And I know the discussion around building on an ancient scheduled monument, in which actually the technical aspects behind that, as it's been explained to us before, is much more complicated than just county archaeologists. It's actually about getting formal permission from Historic England, which would be unprecedented, and the costs, which would be in the hundreds of thousands just to be able to seek that. I do believe that this is the best way to ensure that we do have burial provision. We have 2 years left, and I think it's now time to make a decision. Thank you.
Moved as printed. Is that seconded anywhere? Councillor Salma.
Thank you, Chair. Can I please second the recommendation moved by Councillor Baker Price, please?
It's been suitably moved and seconded. Did anyone want to speak to it? Councillor Khan. Oh, hang on. We've got ping pong going on.
Chair, through you, I think the current ground where we're proposing this cemetery will not only be a loss to amenity to people of Redditch, but my serious concern is that that water table in that ground is very high. That ground in the winter will be virtually impossible to dig into and bury loved ones. That is a serious concern to me. I think that many other locations around Redditch have not been brought forward to this committee, and they should be brought forward prior to any decisions being made. This is not a matter of delay. I don't really want to delay this. To me and the communities I represent, burial is very important, and it has to be done in a timely manner. 2 years to me is not a great amount of time, but it is more than sufficient enough time to find an alternative burial site for people of Redditch, which would be more acceptable to everybody.
The water table matter isn't the acquisition of the land. That's been dealt with at planning, I think. But your comments are your comments. I'm happy that you've said that. Councillor Salma. Hang on.
Thank you very much. Yes, somehow you read my mind. I was going to say the exact same thing. Waterlogging is not an issue that we are discussing tonight. We are only discussing the appropriation of this land. Waterlogging is highlighted as something for the planning committee to consider, and I'm sure they would have considered in the previous hearing as well, and they will also consider it in any of the future planning application meetings as well. Thank you very much.
Got no more speakers. I'd ask the portfolio holder if he wanted another go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to reiterate that any issues, whether it be water table or not, will be, that can be raised at a planning meeting, as it has done already. And if people so wish to bring that up at the future, again, this is a legal designation of how we're designating the land. And I'm grateful to members that are staying focused on that quite niche aspect of this Local Government Act and the legalities around this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That concludes all the speakers. It's been moved and seconded. The portfolio holder has made comment on both. Are you ready to vote? All those in favour of the recommendation as printed on page 15 at 1.1, could they please now indicate? 1, 2, 3, 4, and those against. 2. It is carried. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much. It's cold outside, so you have to scrape your cars. And we don't meet again, I don't think, although we meet almost every week. So it's a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I think bright and early in January, I'll see you all again at Overview and Scrutiny. Thank you.